The first one is, historically, they were paid on commission. And what that meant was that you only made money if you bought media. And that was a bit of a distortion over the advertising industry world, because what it meant was that when a client came to you with a problem, you had to effectively make sure that you could define the problem in a way that there was a paid communication solution. Because otherwise you didn't make any money. So the second problem that that caused was that nobody came to talk to us unless they had a media budget. Now, I would argue that within a good agency, if you have a mix of the people in this room, and some of you are aspiring planners and some of you are aspiring creatives, if you get a mix of imagination and human insight, there are a lot of problems you can actually solve. Not all of them, in fact the majority of them, I would argue, don't require that you give some money to Rupert Murdoch. And the problem of this is that because people assumed we only did communication solutions, and, you know, that was quite accurate in a way, it was a bit like, I always say, having an agency like Ogilvy's, a bit like having a general hospital, but someone's put a sign out the front that says cosmetic surgery. So you can actually help with people's health and well-being in quite a lot of ways by just applying creativity and good psychological insight, and most good creative people are kind of very good amateur psychologists to begin with. Okay? But nobody came to us with those problems because we had this sign that says we effectively do butt jobs for brands. You know, that's what we're in the business of. And when the ad industry changed from commission payment to fee payment, what was so weird is you would have thought people would have said, well, the good news here is that we can now solve lots of problems that may have gone to McKinsey or management consultancy firms in the past. We can solve those problems more imaginatively and more effectively and still get paid to do it. And nobody did, because the muscle memory of the ad agency and the processes and the way they tend to look at the world was all about turning business problems into a need for advertising. Now, there are a lot of business problems that do have a need for advertising, but there are a lot of them, I would argue, that don't. And the other problem that happened was an earlier one, which is in the 1960s, there were lots of psychologists dotted around the ad industry. If you went into a kind of, well, if you've gone into, say, Ogilvy, in the early episodes of Mad Men, there were kind of guys with bow ties and fake Viennese accents who were psychologists. Quite a lot of early advertising was very, very heavily influenced by insights from psychology. So Plink Plink Fizz for Alka-Seltzer was create a social norm around using two. A lot of people only used one Alka-Seltzer, so they realized that if you got people to just use two, you'd sell more Alka-Seltzer. And sure enough, Plink Plink Fizz, I think, increased sales, obviously not by 100%. Some people were already using two, some people didn't respond, but I think sales went up by about 60%. And now, you could argue, by the way, if you had no media budget, what might you do there if you're Alka-Seltzer? I mean, I would argue Plink Plink Fizz is an absolutely brilliant solution, by the way. I'm not dissing it. But let's say you didn't have a media budget, what else might you do? You might have used design. So in a tube of Alka-Seltzer, tablets were wrapped in pairs. So when you unwrapped a tablet, you automatically unwrapped another one, and it kind of said, use them both. You know, you could have said on the packaging, use 1 to 3. I'm not sure 3 might be bad for you, in which case you couldn't say use 3. But if you said use 1 to 3, it's called the Goldilocks effect. Most people would default to 2. So there are lots of ways of solving the problem. I'm not in this case saying that they were wrong to use advertising by any means, but there are other ways of looking at the problem. Ad agencies have historically been disproportionately bad at that because they kind of assume their job is to produce advertising, and it's to solve problems it's to turn human insight into business advantage. That's your job. And quite often, but not always, that involves advertising. The other thing is they got scared of psychology because effectively there were books published like The Hidden Persuaders. Has anybody read it, by the way? Vance Packard wrote it in about 57, I think. Now, I was talking to Paul Feldwick, the Uber planner. Does he come in here to talk?
He's big, yeah.
He's big, brilliant. Okay, I was talking to Paul Feldwick, and we both admitted that we read Vance Packard at school. And Vance Packard, most people took it as this extraordinary attack on American advertising and marketing's manipulation of people's unconscious mental processes. You see? And this was an age where you had films like The Manchurian Candidate, which is about communist brainwashing. The Americans were super paranoid about what you might call manipulation and brainwashing. Now, did any of you, by the way, read Brave New World at school?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I read Brave New World at school. I have to admit, I didn't see it as a dystopian vision of the future. It seemed fucking ace to me. Okay? Because, you had really good drugs, you had high-tech porn, what was it, the Feelies, you had Soma, everything, you had really high-tech modes of transportation. No 14-year-old boy reads Brave New World and goes, gosh, what a dystopian vision of the future. They go, wow, flying cars, thanks, right? And I have to admit, can I really confess something, which is a bit embarrassing? When I was about 15, it never occurred to me that Apocalypse Now was an anti-war film. Because actually, you're 15, right? Flying low over the countryside, blasting out Wagner from a Huey. I was looking at that going, God, that must have been ace. It's terrible, isn't it? It really is. But actually, both Paul Feldwick and I read The Hidden Persuaders when we were in school, and instead of thinking, gosh, what a horrendous vision of the manipulation of people by American corporations, Paul Feldwick and I weirdly went to the same school, so it was probably the same copy that we read, in fact, okay? And we both thought, this sounds really cool. I could get a job doing this. Anyway, but the problem happened is that most people look at problems, and there's some really, really complicated things about the human brain which you need to know before you work in advertising. And a large part of it is, a huge part of our behaviour is determined by instinct and unconscious processes. The unconscious parts of the brain, which I would argue are dominant, don't actually talk. They affect our behaviour by generating emotions: disgust, attraction, lust, repellence, fear, mistrust, affection. They effectively control our behaviour by generating emotional things, not by generating reasons. Very good evolutionary reasons for this, which is that instincts can be inherited, whereas reasons have to be taught. So if you want your advantages to pass on to your kids, you're better off having a good emotion than you are having a good reason. Okay? And the second thing is, if you think about it, okay, if I started throwing human feces around the room, you'd all find it repellent, okay? I hope, anyway, okay? All right? Now, if I asked you to say, why is that a bad thing to do, you'd all come up with basically what is the right answer, actually. It's unhygienic, okay? There are loads of germs. Now, interestingly, that's okay. Now, interestingly, though, however, okay, if you think about it, we've only known that germs existed for the last 140 years, 130 years. And even then, the theory was contested quite a lot at first, okay? So for the previous million years of human existence, we've needed a mechanism that causes us to avoid poo without knowing why we're doing it. And so the reason this works is that we find the smell really unattractive and it makes us go, ugh. Okay? The reason came much later. If you'd asked people in the 18th century, why is poo throwing a bad thing, they probably would have said it's ungodly, or something like that. They would have come up. But the conscious brain always comes up with an explanation for an emotional reaction. But the explanation for the emotional reaction is kind of bullshit. The reason is that the parts of the brain that generate emotions are opaque to introspection. We don't know why they're doing what they're doing. Now, that's both a problem for market research. David Ogilvy spotted this. I thought this was one of the best 20th century quotes in psychology, and I didn't know who said it, okay? And I actually went to Google and searched it, and it said David Ogilvy. I said, no, that can't be right. And I checked, it is actually. He worked in market research for about 15 years of his life. The trouble with market research is that people don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. That's effectively true, okay? That evolutionary instinct generates feelings. It's quite sophisticated, by the way, our poo feelings. Because if you think about it, we find carnivore poo much more repellent than herbivore poo, don't we? This may be because I'm Welsh, but sheep poo doesn't bother me. Mildly erotic. Sheep poo doesn't bother me all that much. Cow pats. If you had a cow pat 10 feet away, it wouldn't ruin your picnic. If you get my point, right? Whereas cat poo, carnivore poo, which is much more dangerous, we find much more repulsive. So it's actually calibrated quite intelligently. Now, the interesting thing there is that once you accept the fact that people have emotional reactions to things